The morning air was heavy, a low mist hanging just above the ground, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and damp earth. Liam parked his aging truck on the gravel road outside the dilapidated house, its sagging roof and cracked windows a testament to years of neglect. He stepped out slowly, the crunch of his boots on the gravel breaking the eerie stillness. He didn't want to be here, but he couldn't ignore the call he'd received the night before. "There's a dog chained up," the voice had said, low and hesitant. "It's been there for years. Nobody's doing anything about it." He tried to press for details. How long? What condition the dog was in? But the caller had hung up, leaving him with only a vague description and an address. Now, standing in the shadow of the house, he felt a familiar mixture of anger and sadness churn in his stomach. The backyard was worse than he'd imagined. It was a patch of barren dirt, scattered with broken tools, rusted barrels, and discarded trash bags. In the center of the chaos, a German shepherd lay slumped on the ground. Even from a distance, Liam could see the animal's ribs pressing against its skin, its fur dull and matted. A thick chain wrapped around its neck, secured to a metal post driven deep into the ground. The chain was so short the dog could barely move. Liam took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He moved closer, careful to keep his movements slow and deliberate. The dog didn't stir. Only when Liam was within a few feet did it raise its head, the effort seeming monumental. Its amber eyes met his, filled with an unbearable mix of fear and resignation. It didn't bark, growl, or retreat. It simply watched him, its gaze hollow, as if it had already accepted whatever fate would come next. "Hey, buddy," Liam said softly, crouching down to make himself smaller. His voice was gentle, barely more than a whisper. "It's okay. I'm here to help." The dog's ears twitched slightly at the sound of his voice, but it didn't move otherwise. Liam could see the raw, irritated skin where the chain had rubbed against its neck. The dog's legs were stiff, its paws caked with mud and blood. The weight of years spent in one place seemed to cling to it like a shroud. Liam clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He'd seen cases like this before, but it never got easier. Each time, the cruelty struck him like a fresh wound. The back door of the house creaked open, and Liam straightened, his eyes narrowing as a man stepped out onto the porch. He was large, with a scruffy beard and a stained undershirt that barely stretched over his belly. A cigarette hung from the corner of his mouth, the smoke curling into the air. "What do you want?" the man barked, his voice rough and impatient. "I'm here about the dog," Liam said, keeping his tone measured. "I got a call about him being neglected." The man snorted, taking a drag from his cigarette. "Neglected? That dog's fine. He's been out here for years, and he's still kicking, ain't he?" Liam felt a flash of anger, but kept it in check. "He's clearly not fine," he said, nodding toward the German shepherd. "He's malnourished, injured, and barely able to move. This isn't okay." The man shrugged, blowing out a plume of smoke. "Not my problem. Dog's just there to guard the yard. Ain't like I need him to look pretty." Liam took a step closer to the porch, his hands at his sides. "Look, I'm not here to argue. Just let me take him. You don't want him, and he needs help. I can give him that." The man eyed him for a moment, then shrugged again. "Do what you want. Saves me the trouble of feeding him." He turned and walked back inside, the door slamming shut behind him. Liam exhaled slowly, his hands shaking slightly as he turned back to the dog. "It's okay now," he murmured. "You're coming with me?" He approached the dog carefully, crouching again to examine the chain. It was rusted and thick, the kind of chain meant for anchoring heavy equipment, not restraining an animal. The padlock securing it was equally corroded, the metal flaking away under his touch. He pulled a set of bolt cutters from his truck, his hands steady now as he positioned the blades around the chain. With a sharp squeeze, the chain snapped, the sound loud in the quiet yard. The dog flinched, but didn't try to move. Liam gently removed the remaining links from around its neck, wincing at the raw wounds underneath. "You're free now," he said, his voice catching slightly. "Let's get you out of here." He lifted the dog carefully, cradling its fragile body against his chest. It didn't resist, its head resting limply on his shoulder. As he carried it to the truck, he felt the warmth of its shallow breaths against his neck, a faint but powerful reminder that it was still alive. Liam placed the dog in the passenger seat, draping a blanket over its thin frame. It looked at him with those same weary eyes, but now there was something else, a flicker of curiosity, maybe even hope. "You're safe now," Liam said, starting the engine. The dog didn't respond, but as the truck pulled away, it let out a soft, almost imperceptible sigh. Liam glanced over, his heart aching. He knew the road ahead would be long, but for the first time in years, the dog had a chance. And that was enough. For now. The ride back to Liam's small animal shelter was quiet. The German Shepherd lay motionless on the passenger seat, his head resting on the edge of the blanket Liam had placed under him. Every so often, Liam glanced over, watching the slow rise and fall of the dog's chest. It was a fragile rhythm, as if even breathing was an effort after years of neglect. The quiet weight of responsibility pressed on Liam's shoulders, but he was no stranger to it. This wasn't the first broken animal he had rescued, though something about this dog already felt different. When they arrived at the shelter, a modest building tucked into the outskirts of town, Liam carefully lifted the dog from the truck. He was startled by how little it weighed. German Shepherds were supposed to be strong, muscular dogs, but this one felt like it was made of bones and feathers. As Liam carried him inside, he felt the dog's head press weakly against his chest, a faint but deliberate movement that sent a pang through his heart. "Welcome home, buddy," Liam said softly as he stepped into the warmth of the shelter. The smell of fresh bedding and the soft hum of heaters filled the air, a stark contrast to the cold, dirty yard where the dog had spent most of its life. Liam had already prepared a space for the dog, anticipating the worst. A large, cushioned bed sat in a quiet corner of the room, surrounded by soft blankets and a bowl of water. He gently placed the dog on the bed, adjusting the blankets to cover its thin body. The dog didn't resist, but its eyes darted around, scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. For a moment, Liam simply sat beside him, giving the dog time to adjust. He poured fresh water into the bowl and placed it within reach. "Here you go," he murmured. The dog's nose twitched slightly, but it didn't move to drink. Liam knew better than to rush. He'd seen this before, animals so broken by neglect they didn't trust even the most basic comforts. It wasn't just about food or shelter. It was about convincing them they were safe. That took time. The first night was rough. The dog barely moved from the bed, his eyes open but unfocused. Liam stayed close, sitting nearby with a book he didn't actually read, just to let the dog feel his presence. Every hour or so, he checked the water bowl, hoping to see signs of progress. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that he heard a faint slurping sound. He looked up to see the dog lapping at the water, his movements slow but deliberate. "Good boy," Liam whispered, careful not to startle him. The dog paused, glancing at Liam briefly before returning to the bowl. It was a small victory, but it was enough to bring a tired smile to Liam's face. Over the next few days, Liam settled into a routine. He would sit with the dog during meals, coaxing him to eat small bites of soft food. At first, the dog refused, turning his head away or simply lying still. Liam didn't push. He would sit quietly, holding the food in his hand, waiting for the dog to make the first move. Slowly, the dog began to eat, first a few tentative licks, then small mouthfuls. Each meal was a step forward. Bathing the dog was another challenge. His fur was matted with dirt and grime, and his skin was raw in places where the chain had rubbed against it. Liam filled a tub with warm water, adding a gentle shampoo designed for sensitive skin. He spoke softly as he worked, his hands steady but gentle. "I know this isn't fun, but you'll feel better after," he said. The dog stood stiffly in the tub, his body trembling with a mixture of fear and discomfort. But he didn't resist, allowing Liam to wash away years of filth. When the water ran clear, Liam wrapped him in a thick towel and held him close, letting the warmth seep into his fragile frame. "You're doing so well," Liam said as he dried the dog's fur. The dog let out a soft whimper, leaning slightly into Liam's touch. It was the first sign of trust, and Liam felt a swell of hope. Each day brought small changes. The dog, whom Liam had started calling Max, began to explore his surroundings. At first, he stuck close to his bed, moving only to drink or eat. But gradually, he ventured farther, sniffing at the edges of the room or watching Liam from a distance. Liam never rushed him, letting Max set the pace. One afternoon, Liam decided to take Max outside. The shelter had a small, enclosed yard with soft grass and a few trees. Liam opened the door and stepped aside, giving Max space to decide. For a long moment, Max stood in the doorway, his body tense. Then, with a cautious step, he moved onto the grass. It was as if he didn't know what to do. He sniffed the ground tentatively, his ears twitching at every sound. Liam stayed nearby, watching as Max took in the unfamiliar sensation of freedom. After a few minutes, Max turned and looked at Liam, his amber eyes holding a question Liam couldn't quite decipher. "You can run if you want," Liam said gently, gesturing to the open space. "It's yours." Max didn't run that day. He walked slowly around the yard, his movements hesitant but steady. Liam didn't mind. The fact that Max was outside at all was enough. As the days turned into weeks, Max began to change. His coat grew shinier, and his body filled out with regular meals. He still carried the stiffness of years spent in one place, but his movements became more fluid. He started to wag his tail faintly when Liam entered the room, a small but powerful sign of trust. One evening, as Liam sat on the floor reading, Max approached him. It was the first time the dog had willingly come close. Liam stayed still, letting Max sniff his hand before resting his head against Liam's knee. The gesture was so unexpected, so deliberate, that Liam felt tears prick his eyes. "You're a good boy, Max," he whispered, running his hand gently over the dog's head. Max let out a soft sigh, his body relaxing for the first time. It was a long journey, and Liam knew there was still work to be done. But in that moment, with Max's head resting against him, he felt a glimmer of hope for both of them. The morning began like any other. Liam had grown accustomed to the rhythm of life with Max, a routine of quiet moments and small victories. The German Shepherd was no longer the frail, lifeless creature Liam had rescued weeks ago. His coat had regained its sheen, his muscles were stronger, and his eyes, though still carrying a trace of sorrow, now held a flicker of curiosity and trust. Liam stepped into the kitchen to prepare Max's breakfast. He could hear the soft thud of paws on the floor as Max stirred from his bed, a sign that the once reluctant dog now anticipated their mornings together. "Morning, Max," Liam called, pouring kibble into the bowl and topping it with a bit of shredded chicken. Max appeared in the doorway, his ears perked and his tail wagging faintly. Liam smiled. "We've come a long way, huh?" Max approached, sniffing the air before cautiously eating. Liam knelt beside him, absently stroking the dog's back. He felt a quiet pride in the progress they'd made together. It wasn't perfect. Max still shied away from loud noises and spent nights staring out the window as if searching for something. But he was healing, slowly but surely. After breakfast, Liam decided to take Max for a walk in the nearby woods. It had become their routine to explore the trails, where Max could stretch his legs and sniff the world around him. Liam clipped the leash on Max's collar, though he barely needed it anymore. Max rarely strayed far from his side. Together, they stepped into the cool autumn air, the ground crunching beneath their feet. The woods were alive with the sounds of rustling leaves and chirping birds. Max trotted ahead, his nose to the ground, pausing occasionally to glance back at Liam. It was moments like these that filled Liam with hope. Max was learning what it meant to be free, to live without fear. When they returned to the shelter, Max seemed content, his tail wagging lazily as he settled onto his bed. Liam went about his chores, confident that the dog was finally beginning to understand that this was his home. But that evening, something felt different. Liam was in the kitchen washing dishes when he noticed the silence. Normally, Max would be lying nearby or exploring the shelter, his claws clicking softly against the floor. But now there was nothing. Liam dried his hands and stepped into the living room. Max wasn't there. "Max?" he called, his voice tinged with concern. He checked the bedroom, the bathroom, even the yard. The gate was latched, and there were no signs of digging. But Max was gone. Panic began to set in as Liam grabbed his jacket and a flashlight. He couldn't fathom where Max would go or why. The dog had shown no signs of restlessness, no indication that he might try to leave. Liam's mind raced with worst-case scenarios as he started down the street, calling Max's name. He searched for hours, his voice growing hoarse as the sun dipped below the horizon. He checked the park, the trails, even the shelter's old yard. Each time, he was met with empty silence. Exhaustion and fear clawed at him as he made his way back to the truck, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. As he drove, something pulled at the edges of his mind, an unspoken thought he didn't want to acknowledge. But as the minutes passed, the thought grew louder, more insistent. He turned the truck toward the old house, the place where he had found Max, chained and broken. When Liam pulled into the driveway, his heart sank. There, in the same patch of dirt where he'd found him weeks ago, lay Max. The dog was curled into a tight ball, his body pressed against the ground as if trying to merge with it. The chain was gone, but Max's posture mirrored the one he'd held for years. It was as though he had never left. Liam stepped out of the truck, his legs unsteady as he approached. "Max," he called softly, crouching down beside the dog. Max's ears twitched at the sound of his name, but he didn't lift his head. His eyes, once full of tentative hope, were clouded with something Liam couldn't quite name. "Why, buddy?" Liam whispered, his voice breaking. "Why did you come back here?" Max let out a low whine, his body trembling slightly. Liam reached out, running his hand gently over the dog's back. The dirt beneath them was cold and hard, a stark contrast to the warm bed waiting for Max at the shelter. But Max didn't seem to notice. His gaze was fixed on the empty yard, as if he were searching for something only he could see. Liam sat beside him, his chest tight with grief. He had known that healing Max would be a long journey, but he hadn't anticipated this. The pull of Max's past was stronger than he had realized. Even with freedom, love, and care, the dog was still tethered to the place where he had spent years of his life. For a long time, Liam didn't move. He simply sat there, his hand resting on Max's back, trying to make sense of the moment. He thought about the years of neglect, the pain Max had endured, and the strange, unshakable loyalty the dog seemed to have for the place where it all had happened. Eventually, Liam spoke, his voice soft but firm. "We're not staying here, Max. This isn't your home anymore. You don't have to come back here." Max turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting Liam's. There was a flicker of recognition, a faint glimmer of something Liam couldn't quite name. Slowly, Liam stood and gently lifted Max into his arms. The dog didn't resist. He lay still, his body limp but not tense, as Liam carried him to the truck. As they drove back to the shelter, Liam glanced over at Max. The dog's head rested on the edge of the seat, his eyes half closed. Liam reached out, resting his hand on Max's head. "We'll figure this out," he said quietly. One step at a time. When they arrived home, Liam placed Max on his bed and sat beside him until the dog drifted into a restless sleep. The weight of the night hung heavy in the air, but Liam refused to let it crush him. Max's journey wasn't over, and neither was Liam's. They would face the past together, no matter how long it took. The days following Max's return to the site of his torment were filled with quiet introspection for Liam. He couldn't shake the image of the dog curled up in the dirt, as though the chains were still there, invisible but unbreakable. It wasn't just heartbreaking. It was a stark reminder of how deeply trauma could embed itself, becoming a prison even when the bars were gone. Liam resolved to double down on his efforts to help Max. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Rehabilitation wasn't a straight path, and Max's journey had already proven that. But Liam was determined. If love, patience, and consistency could break through Max's pain, Liam was going to provide them in abundance. The first step was rebuilding trust. Though Max had come far, his sudden flight back to his old life revealed wounds Liam hadn't fully understood. Liam began spending even more time with Max, ensuring the dog felt his presence at all times. He read aloud while sitting on the floor next to Max's bed, the soothing cadence of his voice filling the room. He cooked meals in the kitchen with Max lying nearby, occasionally tossing him bits of boiled chicken or sweet potato to keep him engaged. Max responded slowly. He seemed more cautious than before, his trust shaken by the pull of his past. But Liam was patient. He never pushed Max, allowing the dog to set the pace. If Max wanted to stay curled on his bed all day, Liam let him, offering a kind word or a gentle pat now and then. One morning, as the sunlight streamed through the windows, Liam decided to try something new. He spread out a soft blanket on the floor and sat cross-legged, a box of dog toys beside him. Max watched from his bed, his head tilted slightly. "These are yours," Liam said, pulling out a squeaky ball and giving it a gentle squeeze. The sound made Max's ears perk up. "See? Nothing scary." He rolled the ball across the floor. It wobbled to a stop a few feet away from Max. For a long moment, the dog didn't move. Then, slowly, he rose to his feet and padded over to the ball. He sniffed it cautiously, nudging it with his nose. Liam held his breath as Max picked it up tentatively in his mouth and carried it back to his bed. "That's my boy," Liam said, his voice filled with warmth. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental, a sign that Max was beginning to rediscover his curiosity, his willingness to engage with the world around him. Over the following weeks, Liam introduced more activities to help Max rebuild his confidence. They took longer walks in the woods, exploring new trails, and even venturing near streams where Max could dip his paws in the cool water. Liam noticed that Max was becoming braver, his steps more confident, his ears perked as he listened to the sounds of nature. He even began to chase squirrels, though his stiff legs made him far too slow to catch them. One afternoon, as they were returning from a walk, Liam decided to test something. He unclipped Max's leash in the enclosed backyard of the shelter. At first, Max froze, his eyes darting toward the gate, as if contemplating an escape. Liam crouched down and held out his hand. "Go on, Max," he said. "You're free." Max hesitated, his body tense. Then, to Liam's relief, he bounded forward, not toward the gate, but toward the open lawn. He ran in wide circles, his tail wagging furiously, his ears flopping as he leaped over tufts of grass. Liam watched with a lump in his throat, his heart swelling at the sight of Max embracing his freedom. But even as Max made progress, Liam knew they still had hurdles to overcome. At night, Max often returned to his old habit of sitting by the door, staring at the darkness beyond. It was as though a part of him was still tethered to his past, unable to fully let go. One night, Liam sat beside Max on the floor, his back against the wall. "You don't have to watch the door anymore," he said softly. "No one's coming to take you back. You're home." Max turned his head slightly, his amber eyes meeting Liam's. There was a flicker of understanding there, a glimmer of something Liam couldn't quite name. He reached out and stroked Max's head, feeling the soft fur beneath his fingers. In time, Max began spending fewer nights by the door. Instead, he started curling up on his bed or lying beside Liam as he read. Liam noticed that the dog's sleep was becoming deeper, his body more relaxed. The restless tension that had once gripped him was beginning to fade. Months passed, and Max continued to thrive. He became a fixture at the shelter, a symbol of resilience for the other animals in Liam's care. Visitors would often stop to admire him, drawn to his calm demeanor and soulful eyes. Liam used Max's story to educate people about the lasting effects of neglect and the power of rehabilitation. He began organizing events, sharing Max's journey to inspire others to adopt, volunteer, and advocate for stricter animal cruelty laws. One afternoon, as Liam was speaking at a local event, Max lay at his feet, his tail thumping softly against the stage. A little girl approached, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Can I pet him?" she asked timidly. Liam smiled. "Of course." The girl knelt down, her small hand gently stroking Max's fur. Max looked up at her, his tail wagging faintly. Liam felt a surge of pride as he watched the dog, who had once been too broken to trust, now leaning into the touch of a stranger. That night, as Liam settled onto the couch, Max climbed up beside him, a bold move for a dog who had once avoided touch entirely. He rested his head on Liam's lap, letting out a deep, contented sigh. Liam ran his hand over Max's back, his heart full. "You've come a long way, buddy," he said quietly. "And I'm so proud of you." Max's journey wasn't perfect, and Liam knew it never would be. The scars of his past would always linger, a reminder of the life he had endured. But those scars no longer defined him. He was no longer the dog chained to the ground, waiting for a kindness that never came. He was Max, a survivor, a friend, and a testament to the healing power of love. As the fire crackled softly in the hearth, Liam leaned back, his hand resting on Max's head. For the first time in a long time, he felt a deep sense of peace. They had found their way forward together, and that was enough.